Critical race. Boy, oh boy. Hey, Brandon. And Zoom ain't gonna just, it's just, Zoom ain't gonna let me just hang here, huh?
Zoom, what happened? What's going
They
on?
just leave me. I said like, hey, Brandon, like 5 seconds ago.
I was looking for the unmute button. Give me 1 second. I use the bathroom real quick. I'll be right back. 1 second, okay?
Yeah. Wow. Hello.
Hi, Lo. I was on mute.
I did the same thing with Brandon. I was like, hey, Brandon. And it was just like silence. And I was like, oh, Zoom just be leaving me hanging. Like, by the way, we do need to talk tonight because I have some information I just got from, okay.
Yeah.
So Brandon was heading handling something. So I guess we can start off with we had a discussion yesterday about there you are. There's a pretty best friend.
Thinking about turning that back off. Like, okay, bye.
Don't be awkward. Don't do that. Oh my gosh, you are being extra. Anyways, so for reference, just for the purpose of the recording, I think I had pulled it up, but we were watching a video that I think went viral. Brendan, we're taking the conversation away from your example of critical race theory. I apologize because this was, but we'd love your feedback on it. Did you see the video where the white, this was like really loud, but this
she was chasing the
is that the Victoria's Secret girl?
Yes, yeah,
Victoria's Secret woman person. I saw that, but I didn't click on it. I was like, oh, it's another meltdown video.
It was a meltdown.
I mean, you feel free to tell me about it. I'm down to hear a good meltdown story.
Kayla, you wanna tell your condition, or do you want me to tell?
Yeah, well, maybe like introduce it and start it off, and then give my 2 cents if it's worth something.
Okay, so the video was the caption, Karen attacks lady, then plays the victim, part 1. So 2 parts of the video. Essentially, the whole video starts after an assault that happened on a Black woman or just woman of color. I don't think we ever see the the woman, and the white woman proceeds to have a breakdown. I mean, as a therapist, I mean, that was intense. And actually, so Keela had sent it to me. I had already seen it though, but I was like, my reaction ended up being different. I'm not going to say, I mean, I didn't know how to compare it to anyone else, but I spoke with Keela about it. And I wanted to like have that recorded because I feel like it was a moment where I definitely learned something. And as soon as she said it, it made complete sense. But when I was watching the video, I had a moment where I was like, yo, this woman, it went from like, just, I was weirded out. And then I was like, I started thinking like, you know, I get it in a way. That woman's life is ruined with this video in some way. And so I was like, damn, but then I was like, come on, this is like ridiculous. Like at what point, I'm like, for her to have even recorded, but then there's also some humor to it, which I'm not gonna lie about, because I was just like, yo, whatever that is. And so yeah, I feel like I can't necessarily go back to the perspective I had before Keela had, you know, shared the information with me, but I was like, yeah, I think for a white woman, my reaction made sense, which is why I wanted to bring it here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. If that was a relay handoff, got it.
You know, I'm bad at those.
It's okay, I got
I
it.
need improvement.
So, you know, Sarah, when she was sharing with me her initial reaction, it was, you know, really along the lines of, A, it is kind of funny, you know, at least superficially on surface initially. Um, you see it and you see her, you know, being hysterical, her theatrics, and you're just like, she is really tripping. And again, you get a giggle out of it. And from what Sarah shared with me yesterday, it went from a giggle to, dang, I kind of feel bad for this girl because her life is ruined. And hopefully everybody here has seen the video at this point. But what basically happened was you could see that an altercation of some sort, probably verbal previously, had already started between a Black woman and a white woman in the mall in a Victoria's Secret store. And in the beginning of the recording, you see the white woman run towards the Black woman and try and hit her. And she dodged it. And as soon as the white woman realized that she missed and that she was also being recorded, she freaked. She literally, I mean, the scene started off with utter gold. She had a shirt in her hand and literally took it and threw it on the counter and covered her eyes and started bawling. Literally pretended to pass out on the floor, then later proceeded to chase this woman around the store, literally chasing her. But while
That was
she's
part
chasing
two.
her, yeah, that was part two. There are
Two
two.
parts. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. She was chasing her around the store, but yelling, "Get away from me." She was literally trying to create a scene. She already knew that she'd messed up. And she was trying to recreate a scene that somehow made the Black woman the aggressor. Even when the woman was throwing her tantrums on the floor, I mean, she was literally squatting in the middle of the floor with her hands like this, bawling, crying, and screaming. And there were some other guests in the store, and they were at the checkout counter, and they were also white. And they told a Black girl, they said, you know, why don't you just leave? And the Black woman was like, I'm standing literally, you can tell she's at least 10 to 12 feet away from her at this point and has never approached the woman again after she just got lunged at. And they're asking the Black woman to leave. She's like, I'm not going anywhere. And I was talking to my aunt about this earlier. And the sad part is that there are so many instances that happen like this that aren't recorded. And if you had walked by that store in the mall and seen that scene and fiasco, you would have been like, oh my gosh, who did what to this woman? And you would automatically empathize with her. So let's take that and put a pin there. So that was Sarah's perspective, which is understandable. And before I come out with my perspective, I think what's one of the things that's most valuable about these perspective circle sessions is that people have different life experiences, and different life experiences shape your perspective At a certain point, it does become willful ignorance, excuse me. But before then, you can't be mad at a person for simply not understanding, because their life experience would not lead to that understanding. So now to get to my reaction, and I think I can speak, if not for all, but maybe the majority of Black people, in saying that at first it's freaking hilarious, right? And you're like, look at this shit here. Excuse me for anyone.
It's okay, we're uncensored here.
Yeah, okay, my bad. So, you're like, just look at this here. And then it goes from thinking it's funny on the surface level to being enraged as a Black person, honestly. And here's why. The reason why it's really upsetting is because we know that that exact same set of, and Sarah, you have to understand, well, there's no disrespect here, but white women crocodile tears have led to so much bloodshed and death. Look at Emmett Till. We're talking about a child who was accused of whistling at a white woman. He was dismembered, he was urinated on, he was completely disfigured. Everyone has those images stamped in their minds, and that's again because his mother was adamant about saying, look at what they did to my child, and she wanted the world to see the horror. And then decades later, this woman comes out and says she made it all up. A child that is dead and mutilated over that. And there are so many of those types of scenarios that have happened over and over. So many Black men who are incarcerated because they were told they were accused of being a rapist. They were accused of being a murderer or what have you. And I was just watching a study on Netflix not too long ago. It was a show talking about studies regarding memory, and how I think it's up to 70% of our memory recounting is usually completely inaccurate. And so they're starting to put to the test how valid even people's testimonies are on the witness stand. Because there was a woman that was actually sitting beside a Black man who she had accused of raping her 25 years ago. And she saw him in the lineup. And it was something that someone said, like, isn't that him right there? Isn't that him? And simply through that encouragement and just saying, hey, kind of like a tap on the shoulder, in her mind, she said she genuinely attached his face as her rapist. And she believed that for years and years. It wasn't until DNA, which has saved so many lives and gotten rid of so many sentences, thank God. But, before that came out, she was like, I didn't know. I genuinely believe that. So I say all that to say, that particular instance is a little bit different, but it still leads to this, the weight, the heaviness of a white woman's word when she says that she's in danger of any type. It's just like, blare the sirens, red, sound the alarms, it's all bad. And the thing is, it's been weaponized a lot, a lot, a lot. And it has led to people's deaths, harassment, you name it. And that's what I was explaining to Sarah, is the unfortunate side of our reaction to it as Black people. Again, I can't speak for everyone, but at least from people that I've spoken to, it follows that same tone. And so that's the issue with that. And
So I'm going to take that as a pass off real quick.
It's pass off, yeah.
Because I wanted to, so I felt, and I will say I don't know the ins and outs of critical race theory. Brandon, I think you have a better education there, so that's why I always want you in these conversations anyway. But as soon as Keela brought that, as soon as she said there have been so many accounts of a white woman saying something, it clicked for me. I was like, my perspective was in the moment, that's what I could do, was natural. I didn't expand it to consider that other people have other shared experiences. Even the person that I know, my lifestyle is built off of learning other people's perspectives in life and helping them through trauma. And that as soon as it was finally showed to me, that I just had so many more, I wouldn't say it was a bias in this place. It was actually transference. That is like, oh, I mean, I know and understand as a white woman that I could be that person. I would not handle it that way. I don't think I'd ever get there. But there was just that natural reaction that I still have. And it's my responsibility to look at that and then expand it and include more, whether it's perspective, reflection on why is that my initial reaction. And saying that to tie into critical race theory is because my understanding is this, the concept is to bring all of those perspectives to the forefront and not just start it with one could say a white man's history, but one could just say like just one-sided. And it's almost like the highlights. Mm-hmm. And within the highlights, people get lost, and people who have been treated with and had significant stories and treated in significant ways that have influenced us to have the systems that we have in place, to have the ways of thinking and the schools of thought that we have in our society today. And yeah, that's all I'm going to leave there.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know what? I will ask a favor. Can someone explain to me, because I just heard critical race theory, like that term or what have you, within the past week. And I remember realizing that apparently it's this big uproar about it. People have differing opinions of what it is. From what I think I understood, from what I read, white people think that it's a form of racism, maybe, or something. I don't know. I might have it all wrong. So can someone, tell me what critical race theory is actually?
See Brandon's talking face getting ready.
My talking face is getting warmed up. Critical race theory. Okay, so basically it started in the legal field of higher academia. So it's not something that's been, so those people were saying, oh, this is something that, has been taught in schools or grade schools or even high schools. It's not a thing. Basically, during the 60s and 70s, when we're talking about addressing legal reform for the country in regard to the civil rights movement and whatnot, you have all these sweeping laws that are being made. They're supposed to address, systemic injustice. Brown versus Board of Education, being one of them. But then you come back and you revisit those laws, that new legislation that's been imposed, and you're finding that the problems are still there. So that's indicative of something from the legal field that was indicative of something being wrong beyond just the laws themselves. There's something else going on, socially, legally, sociopolitically, that's affecting. So that's the idea, that's the theory. And so then becomes building a body of evidence and determining, what are the levers of power, what are the mechanisms, what are these systems in place that are contributing to these circumstances that are not being altered by simply changing, a law and saying, okay, separate but equal is over, so all schools should be integrated and fine now. And then coming back later on and finding that's not the truth, okay? Mm-hmm. So that mentality bleeds over, out of the legal field into other areas where people start examining, within, the history field, like, okay, how do we show a through line from these instances like slavery to incarceration rates now? Just like in the legal field, if we're talking about there's something that came before that's affecting these results now, there's got to be something historically that came before that's affecting these results now. Medical field, same thing. Why are Black women receiving disproportionate treatment in the medical field? There must be something that's feeding these numbers. Let's apply some theories and examine our history to see how that came to be. Why do we believe that Black women, why is there an overwhelming belief that Black women can tolerate pain more? Where did that come from?
Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about critical race theory. It's about examining our past in such a way that we can connect these dots, as opposed to saying slavery happened, it was bad, we went to war about it, boom, the North won, racism's over, people just need to get over it. That's the mentality that some individuals want to perpetuate, because once you start analyzing the past critically and you start looking at these things that are connected, then once you see a problem, there's an obligation to fix it. And the obligation to fix it might involve changing some of those power structures and removing individuals from power who have been seated there for generations.
That makes so
It makes a lot of sense. I just have to share this too, because I feel like it's going to be a little off the topic, but it resonated so much more to hear it that way for me, because that's exactly what I do with therapy, is that people commonly, mental illness, there is a genetic component. I'm not going to unpack that right now, but a lot of it is nurture, right? And so you have that generational trauma, and that can be a whole racial discussion in itself, but the influence on one's mental stability starts from, in the womb. If you have an anxious mother, high blood pressure, that's going to alter the formation of a baby in there, and then to put it in line with the behaviors. And so it's common, like when I meet someone, a client, and they've looked at their past, they live their past every day. And that's the problem, is that there's no separation between, or no ability to separate, let's just put it that way, because it is a skill that we have to learn, to be able to look at the past, examine it, not notice our reaction, because that's where it comes to, and be able to create that boundary in order to create a different future that's not based out of the past. And I often talk about, and I do want to, this is what I say often, and I'm just going to share it, and if someone wants to critique it out, more than welcome. But I feel like I apply that with my view of how this whole discussion is going, is that people just want to get rid of the past. They don't, and it's repeating itself, just looks different. Trauma repeats itself, it's different behaviors. It's an addiction, or it's an anxiety attack, or it's food addiction. Well, sorry, that's addiction too, but overeating or obesity, because you can't control the behavior. And they just try to compartmentalize it, or they look at it and it just bleeds into, and people get overwhelmed with it, and you can't. And that's why I'm here. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, no, honestly though, it brings up a solid point, because that, to your point, Brandon, that's the issue. People want to tuck it away, and that's human nature. When something's uncomfortable, when it forces us into a state of evaluating something that is overwhelming, and sometimes it doesn't even have to be an overwhelming negative, but whatever that is, people just say, whoa, that's a lot, don't want to touch that. And a lot of times there's a defensiveness that's built around it. But the unfortunate part about it is defensiveness also creates distance, and it also creates division. Because when you get defensive about something, then you might say something that you don't mean. And then that's when maybe a white person says, oh, you know what I'm saying? I'm just so tired of talking about slavery. I'm so tired of talking about race stuff. You say that to a Black person in 2021, hashtag trigger. Now you've got a problem. And that may not even be what that person meant, but it's literally like, I am tired of everything that is involved with having these racial conversations. But then it spins it on its head, and it's like, well, how do you think it feels to be Black? We don't get to just tuck it away and not talk about it. My melanin doesn't get to hide. Every day that I walk out, I am recognized as a Black woman, and there are different struggles that come with that, like Brandon mentioned, in the healthcare medical field. It's embarrassing to say he's right, because we've had doctors finally admit that Black women are perceived to have better pain tolerance. It's oh, they'll be fine, do the bare minimum. But a white woman goes in with a paper cut and she gets Percocets, for her pain. And we have to be able to tackle these things, and to also look at epigenetics, which is how, our environment and the way that we scale or create that environment for ourselves actually dictates the expression of genes. So you're taking trauma, and especially another thing too, in the Black community, we're all about survival. And we've got to get out of survival mode and really into thriving and enjoying life. But it's hard to do when sometimes you fear for your life, or everywhere you turn, you feel like you see something where a Black person is getting attacked. And you take that with you, and that trauma continues to be passed down, especially when it's not dealt with. And so for people to say, oh, that was so long ago, that's not where we are now. No, it's exactly where we are now, because it is still affecting us. Because other than seeing it on TV, other than seeing it on social media, there's a component of it that is genetic. And we've got to start having these open conversations about it and do something differently. And now that I understand what the critical race theory is truly about, it's really just, it pisses people off because when they don't want change and when they feel like it's centered around something that they don't want to continue to dive into, usually the defensiveness is what, takes stake. And then we get right back to square one where there's a divide. Or even Black people, to have these conversations, and a white person not feel like if they say something wrong, that we're going to bite their heads off. It's really about forming a gap and bridging the understanding by both people being receptive and saying, we need the other person or the other side to understand better, so everybody do their part in listening, because white people have a perspective too. And I think that's something that we as Black people need to honor. And even though we say, oh, well, they don't have a right to say anything, everybody has a right to express their perspective. You have to give what it is that you're asking for as well. And so that's why I think these are important to talk about these, because there's just a lot that the other side doesn't know is the perspective of the other,
Well, I mean, I'm totally with it as long as we're discussing truth. I mean, I think one thing that needs to be acknowledged is the disinformation, specifically, surrounding, critical race theory. Why is it problematic for, history teachers to literally teach history? We're not talking about doctoring anything. We're not talking about, injecting, the Black Panther Party platform for, how systems should run. Nothing. We're just talking about history as it is. And I think we need to focus on, like, what are the lies surrounding this? Because they're not being, it's not like one person sat back and gave a rebuttal to critical race theory. There's a whole engine that's advancing a certain set of lies to create that discomfort for individuals, who don't know anything about it. So if you don't know anything about critical race theory, and you have, this contingent of individuals saying, oh, you don't need to read up or learn anything about it, just know that it's teaching, white children that, they're bad, and it's teaching Black children to hate white children. And individuals go out and they gobble that up because that's easy to consume, versus going and actually researching. I mean, like, you can go on and just do a quick Google and find some reputable sites, are reputable sources from reputable sites that can tell you about critical race theory and its application in various fields. But in our society now, we are valuing lies as much as we do truth, and we're allowing two separate realities to exist. And there's no negotiating across that barrier. In order for us to find some kind of middle ground, we all have to be on the same planet. We all have to accept that, gravity pulls stuff down, birds fly in the sky or whatever, unless they're penguins, whatever. But the fact is, we have to accept that there are certain facts that correlate for us to move forward together in this vehicle that is, the human race. But we have people telling very specific lies that are pandering to, the worst of us, that are fueling that divide. And I think we really need to start discussing that.
Well said. I mean, straight up that I think that's the ugly part, because like you said, you get somebody who wants to inquire and ask about what critical race theory is. And then you take someone who wants to further perpetuate ignorance. And now they take that person who had a genuine, just neutral curiosity. What does this mean? And now you've planted it, and it's like a stamp where it's now a definition that is far from the actual truth and definition of what it is. Like I said, it's just a defensiveness. It's like, well, we don't want to change. And it's like, it's so interesting, because it's like, well, if we're talking about lies now being taught to our children, and it's like, do we really want to get into that conversation? Because the lie is not what we're actually like requesting be put in there. The lie is actually how it's been. And that's the whole thing. There's so many lies like that we're starting to uncover. Nobody likes that, right? You dig up all the dirty stuff and expose it. People get uncomfortable. And it's like, well, we've been uncomfortable, and it's not to say let's make everybody uncomfortable altogether just for the sake of it. It's like, let's do this with an objective to change and to be different. We're in the middle of this day and age where we have an opportunity to pivot a lot as a nation, as a Black community, just the US, everything in general, because so much has been called to light that we're seeing is not working in healthcare, in law enforcement, pretty much across the board, economics, even getting into this vaccine and stuff. Why is health crossing so many different lines? It's now perverted with politics, is now perverted with people's ability to travel, people's ability to work and have what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, just support their household. But that's what I'm saying. It's like everything's starting to get so intertwined, and seeing that what we have going on as it stands or as it stood, it's not working. And
Well,
that's what we're afraid of.
I'll just add this too, because I think like from a mental health clinician standpoint, part of the reason I started this space is because I saw so many people reacting, as they should. I do think we need those external reactions. And because when we have that, there does, all an emotion is something that we, that is a stimulus from a reaction from an outside stimulus. And a lot of the times it's actually kind of what critical race theory or Brandon's description of it implies, is that it requires review. Not every reaction we have needs to be played out the way that seems natural, especially in this day and age. Maybe when we were back fighting like saber-toothed tigers, did we hear, a rock drop and we need to run because we don't know what the hell it is, and we don't have technology to tell us like, yo, there's a saber-toothed tiger behind that rock and your life is at stake. Keela can testify, like I've got some reactive responses. I'm like, because I have my own past with being in crowds of people, I don't trust people in that I don't know you. So yeah, when something kind of like comes at me, I'm going to react because I'm wired that way based off of my experiences. But that's now not useful for what I do today. I'm jumpy. I startle easily. It's not really fun when you're 6 feet tall and you're the person that gets scared easily. Okay. So the problem with that is that we're not taking a look at this. And I was having this, I speak a lot in metaphors just because I'm a visual person. It's like the breaker trips for people. You fix one wire and how you think it is, but as soon as like this conversation, I think even down to the word race sometimes, even though that can be it's a word, it's a noun, that they're people's breaker trips, and they're like, and it will sound like I'm justifying for white people, but I'm not, because everyone's stress level is their own responsibility. So if you're not able to pay attention to those words that can be used in other contexts in your life, but just because that one has one meaning that references you trying to understand someone else's worldview, I see that as a problem.
But that's also the programming too. I mean, I think that's one thing that we're tiptoeing around, not saying it is happening intentionally, but it happens naturally as a result of, conversations about race. Individuals subconsciously, whenever the word race comes out, immediately you're taught to run for your corner and put on your jersey. The word race came out, so I need to look out for anything about Black people, that might come out of this person's mouth. I need to look out for anything about white people that might be said that's going to be, offensive to, the brand.
And what about the other races?
And that too. But the thing is, what I want to highlight is the fact that happens. And that happens because that's how we are programmed to react in this society. That's something that we need to get to the bottom of, and we need to understand when it comes to having these conversations about race, when it comes to understanding the construct of race. There's got to be a separation if we're going to move forward. There's got to be a separation of us as individuals from these labels, so we can have these conversations about white supremacy. Because when we say white supremacy, we don't immediately I don't mean like, Sarah, you're a white supremacist just because you're white. But if you are stuck in that rudimentary view of what race is, whenever you hear white at any time, you suddenly associate yourself with that, and then you disassociate yourself from the conversation. Oh, she said white, so she's talking about all white people. White people includes me. Automatically, I'm cutting this off. I don't want to hear anything else because she's talking about white supremacy now. And that doesn't involve me. And if I do interact with this conversation in any shape, form, or fashion, I'm doing it from, a position of altruism where I'm accepting this person's reality, but I'm not accepting the term, almost like, the Christian statement. I love the center. I mean, I love the center, even though I dislike the Sid, which can help when it comes to initially working in areas of civil rights where you're trying to address racism, but eventually you're going to get exhausted because eventually you are repeatedly submitting yourself to trauma and over again, because you're not really accepting the fact that that label doesn't apply to you.
Exactly.
Eventually you don't want to come back.
Right. And just so my brain therapist, I hear that it's like, yeah, the reaction goes unnoticed. Taking time away from it, your central nervous system that gets activated will calm down, but the de-escalation has to be intentional. It has to be in order for that not to shape how you create even more associations to that particular word. And just because, I mean, I can acknowledge that up until a couple years ago, I wouldn't say I actively resisted knowing that I was privileged, but I didn't take any steps to accommodate the idea. Mm-hmm. So doesn't make me a white supremacist, but it definitely, like, depending on how far I resisted the idea, it definitely could trace back to that. And that's like, if I wasn't, does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, there's a flip side to it too. I mean, if you are a person who has been labeled Black and you're approaching white supremacy and you can't separate, your race and all whites in general, the entire white race, from that term, then you might be in this position of, elevated contention on a regular basis whenever you interact with all white people. That white person there has definitely got to be a representative of white supremacy because they're white, because that's what I've been taught, that's what I believe. And you may keep that to yourself, but it's going to bleed into any and everything that you do. And whenever there's some pivotal point where you're put on the line, you have to give your opinion on matters, it's going to come off as bigoted, it's going to come off as aggressive, it's going to come off as hurtful, it's going to come off as defensive, because once again, you are not separating yourself from the construct whenever we're talking about eliminating this thing that's very, very real out of the system, and that is white supremacy.
Yeah, I mean, you're honestly, like, the two big things that I pull from what you guys are saying is, like you said, we put on our jerseys, we suit up, and we're like, okay, I got to stand with this group. And I would say we just do it in different ways as Black people and as white people. As Black people, we do it by being ready for war, right? It's like, I'm not playing this crap anymore. And again, defensive, right? And we're just ready to pounce if someone says something wrong. That's the wrong attitude to go into it with. So that's one side. Then on the white side, I know that I don't agree with, this is going to sound like I'm being so funny, but I don't agree with Susie or Susan or what have you. And that's not me being funny acting, but yeah, but say if that's the example that we're using, and it's like, but overall, I do get what she's saying. It's like a rationalization that begins to come to then somehow mold your mind into being protective of her opinion simply because it is a white opinion, and saying, it would probably be worth less smoke if I just go ahead and mold into this. It's almost like the courageousness is what is lacking. And that can really go both ways. If you have a group of radical Black people who are pissed off, which rightfully I could understand, and their thing is, what, you want smoke, you want fire, I got that for you. Now let's all suit up and arm up. But say you've got somebody who's more on the Martin Luther King application side of things, and it's like, I don't want to suit up. I would rather have a conversation. I would rather go about things a different way, whatever that is that's different from the group. There are some Black people who are afraid to get involved and to speak up and say, listen, I'm as angry as you are, but that's not the way that I want to go about it. Or I'm as angry as you are about this, but I don't know, there's another component or something that I would like to interject. And again, it may be the thing that involves a conversation versus, going and being violent. And so what I really just want us to come to is a place where people are, and this is just a life thing in general, liberating yourself from the consequences of other people's opinions of you and your viewpoints and how you feel is one of the best things that any adult could do for themselves, right? You just have to come to a place in life where you start to have a firm foundation of what you believe in, your ideology, your morale and such. And it doesn't matter if anybody else agrees with it or likes it. And the more people do that on a intrapersonal basis, I think the better we'll all be able to grow, because if you're able to stand in your truth and what you feel about a situation, and you can do it with tact, you can do it with respect and dignity and kindness, but you're firm in it, that's where people need to come to, and where we can start having an interjecting of these different types of opinions so we can have a better understanding. Because a lot of white people think that if you're pro-Black, you're anti-white. And to me, I'm like, what? That's not what that means at all. And a lot of it honestly ties into that critical race theory. They're like, oh, well, if you have a problem with this and that, and you're trying to interject more Blackness into the history books, and that must mean that you're against whites or you have a problem with whites. And it's like, no, that's not it at all. And the same thing with white people on their side, when there's an issue or something that comes up, and I don't know, maybe it's the whole neighborhood that feels an entire way. And that if you speak out against the popular opinion of the masses of the people that you're around, you might become a black sheep. Sometimes people don't want to be isolated or iced out. And it's like, I would rather just pretend to go along with it for my comfort. And that's the other thing, the white privilege, is that they're like, that doesn't really affect me on a day-to-day basis, so I don't have to touch that. And that's the thing that I think we should talk about too, is that there is no separation, because we live on the same planet, we live in the same places. And so if I'm affected, you are too. You're just not talking about it. You want to distance yourself because it's uncomfortable. So
I had made a comment earlier about other races because it was a little snarky and it kind of interrupted you, Brandon, so I apologize. But it was because of a situation that I was in where it actually did open my eyes. I was like, I think just right now, the biggest presentation of race is between Black people and white people right now. We had a sprinkle of the Asian hate, but that has been going on. Again, it wasn't, I had my own like enlightenment about, I'm like, well, no, Sarah, like, of course this is happening. My life is not the only one being lived right now as seconds pass, but there, I'm not going to speak for this person, but I can see where and why they would ask me like, well, why don't you talk about other races? And it just happened. It just showed me, I was like, well, that's where the road split with this person is who we're talking about, where we can't, it becomes too intense because they don't necessarily have the exposure. And then I don't want to say they label me pro-Black, but I'm pro-human, like everyone has an experience. So I'd like to value it. And I know at some point someone has to be right in order to get there, or someone has to, something has to, like some conclusion has to come from that to make some kind of resolution and we can move forward. But I have my own experience with, being called on is like, and how does critical race theory apply with other races?
Well, I mean, one thing is, and that when you talk about is, like I said before, it's not about teams. It's about examining one thing that's pervasive in our system. It's what our nation was founded upon. This is what people don't want to talk about. Our nation was founded upon edicts of white supremacy. And when we're talking about that, we're not talking about all white people being born inherently, with a white supremacist mindset, or being white supremacists, declared white supremacists, at birth. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a certain class of individuals who had power, who passed laws to ensure that they maintain power, at the expense of other individuals, whether it be women, whether it be, people who were non-Christian, whether it be, Native Americans. We're talking about something that bridges a bunch of different groups of people in regard to effect. So whenever you're talking about that in our history, you're talking about what was done to Native Americans, you're talking about what was done to Blacks, you're talking about, what was done to Asian Americans, you're talking about not just what's been done here domestically, but also what's been done in an imperialist mindset all around the globe, in brown countries all around the globe. A good reason that we're looking at all this destabilization in South America is because of American intervention in those governments. Why? To keep America in power. Who are we keeping in power? Not brown people, not gay people. There's a very, if we look at a very, very narrow section of individuals that are designed to be empowered here, we are looking at white, conservative, straight males. Period. Like that's what the laws were originally written to protect.
Yeah.
And so saying that is somehow offensive now. Why? Because white supremacy is not something that you inherently have. It's something that is a birthright that's passed on to you. In order for you to receive it, your mind has got to be in a certain place. Now, in the past, whenever you didn't have information, you could lie to your kids, obstruct certain facts, tell everybody, just like Akila said, like, Martin Luther King was a peaceful person and wanted to get along and hold hands. Martin Luther King was quite the revolutionary. They don't teach that part about Martin Luther King. And so they don't teach that part because they want individuals to believe this lie that if you protest a certain kind of way, you'll eventually be heard and your needs will be answered. When in reality, that's not how anything has been accomplished in this country.
Agree. It's skewing the narrative on purpose, like anybody who's in a position of power, and I mean, literally anybody, is going to do what's necessary to protect their position of power. And sometimes there are ugly decisions that are made to do so. And I'm not saying that that's right. I'm not backing that. But that's a whole thing. You have to look at, just talking about what's good for the people who are making the decisions. Why on God's green earth would I put laws in place that aren't to my advantage?
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? That's crazy to do that. So you got to understand, if the founding fathers of this country, and I don't even want to get into that.
You're right. It's not even about like looking at it from a standpoint of our rights and what we deserve, or just having those civil rights. It's more so looking at it from a aspect of, it's a challenge to diminishing their power and them being comfortable. So it's not like, it's not so much, they're getting rights. It's more so we're losing power. And that's the biggest issue right there. It's not even about like, I don't even think they care. They could care less about our rights or whatever else. And it's not even just because we're Black. It's just because they've held that level so long. So anybody or anything that's a threat to that, to the cisgender, usual structure of what it is for a white male to control America is a threat.
Correct.
So that's the largest issue.
And whenever you deal in white supremacist groups, like, I'm as a communications instructor, that's one of the things that I have like focused on over the past 4 to 6 years. Is basically like infiltrating and studying white supremacist far right, alt-right culture. And whenever you go in there, they have something called the 14 words, and the 14 words is basically about securing the future of America for white children. And so part of doing that is distorting history so those white children are comfortable assuming those positions, and they don't feel the guilt whenever the repercussions of the systems that they assume end up trickling down and hurting brown people. It's easy to say, okay, well, it's all right for me to take these millions of dollars in prison stock and use that to, you know, build my businesses, build my homes and whatnot. It's easy for me to do that in the most incarcerated country in the world if I'm looking at all the brown people that I'm making money off of and leasing as slave labor, 21st century slave labor. If I look at them as deserving of being there, there's something wrong inherently with those people. And this is the function that they serve in society. And that function is being incarcerated and being used for tax revenue and free, cheap labor for local businesses, local corporations. That's okay. That's all right. I have no problem owning that stock now. But if you know the disproportionate application of the law that put those individuals in there, you might divest from that prison stock. Prison stock goes down.
Yeah. You know what? To piggyback off what you're saying, not only that, and I want to do some more research about it. I remember coming across something that was saying some of the largest plantations, and it said the last names also have this carry the same names as some of the largest prisons. So all they did was change the structure from being a plantation to a prison. They just changed the pipeline. They changed it from going to Africa or wherever else and getting slaves to going to our lower socioeconomic communities and our impoverished areas and getting the blacks and other minorities that don't really have a chance, and they're just filtering them into this, you know how it is, the prison pipeline. And it's pretty much the same concept. And they've gotten smarter. They've infiltrated every area. It's like it's just like, the smartest thing to do now. You have to be strategic in what you're doing. Back in the day, you could just wear your white hood and burn some people and hang them or whatever. But now the biggest thing is, let's get into this structure where let's become judges and let's do this. So the biggest thing now is trying. So we have to try to even get a seat at the table. And then when you get at the seat at the table, you have to pull others up. But that's a whole fight in itself, because they're in areas that, like, we get placed in areas, we'll be like CHROs of diversity. Or, we'll give them CHRO of human resources. So when we fire somebody, they're getting fired by their own. But we're not presidents and CEOs of the corporation itself, which is why I think it's so important for some of us to have that mindset of entrepreneurship instead of working for somebody, to start investing in our own. So that way we can kind of change the structure, because we're not going to change it from within at this point. There's too many barriers that's going to keep us out. But if we you create your own, and then you network and you give them no choice, then it's a whole different ball game.
Yeah.
But you touched on something important. Creating your own is great and should happen. But one of the main things that you touched on that, we need to talk about is, like you said, the infiltration of the legal system, and also the infiltration of our educational system too. Now, because of, even before critical race theory, this was happening, you're seeing more and more right-wing, far-right, sympathizers, right-wing extremists infiltrating local school boards. Why? So they can set the educational policies, remove, questionable books from the libraries, and, people don't even know, what's going on. If you look at pre-World War II Germany, it was the same thing. Whenever Hitler came to power, Hitler didn't just show up and start throwing people in ovens like, let's kill all the Jews and go to war with the rest of the Western world. That wasn't what he did. The first time he tried to be aggressive and take over the government, and he failed horribly and went to prison. And he realized while he was in prison, whenever he wrote Mein Kampf, he was like, this is not the way I'm going to take over this government. The way what we need to do as a party is we need to get into politics, and we need to take over the law. So whenever our people show up in front of our judges, they can get our justice. And that's exactly what he did when he got out. He didn't take over the government by himself. He took over the government over time with a party that infiltrated the judicial system. So you could have, there's a bunch of Jews who had businesses of their own.
Oh, yeah.
In Germany, a bunch of Jews had businesses of their own. But you can see how successful that was in stopping the Holocaust from happening. Those businesses were just seized by that corrupt government.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the owners were put into those concentration camps and ovens. So whatever I'm talking about, where I'm hearing people talking about, we get money. I'm not belittling what you're saying whatsoever. But when I'm hearing people talk about we need to start our own and get money and break off and do our own thing at our own institutions, I'm like, more power to you.
Oh, no.
You don't pay attention to these politics going on?
Absolutely. We need to do both. I'm saying we need to infiltrate those areas in which we're able to, like, where we can get a seat in the room. All right, it's sad. We still having, first black judge, first black mayor, first whatever. It's 2021. We're still having first. My thing is that's not enough. With creating our own, we have to get in those positions where we can actually start networking with our own, so we can collaborate. It can't just be, we got to have our own and have this niche in the community. We're too far behind for that. If we're too far behind to say, we're just going to pour in the black wood, it's too late for that. So just being realistic, and there's a fine line with everything. Even when you look at it, education, there's always a fine line. One of the realest things I read was that when you go to school and when you get an education, it's basically just catching you up on the world because you haven't been here. That's all it is. But if the world was never designed for you, then you're not going to get the type of education you need. So like you said, that curriculum is important. So of course, that's why we made HBCUs. But again, there's that fine line because on one hand, you have historically black colleges and universities, and you're like, let's keep them black. On the other hand, you want to infiltrate white America, but you don't want to try to do a collaboration. So HBCUs are not even known. As a recruiter, I remember I recruited for some places, and my white colleagues are like, what the heck is the Fayetteville State and the Winston-Salem? Like these are the places you need to go. They didn't even know what it was. Only in the South do we really even have HBCUs. If you go to the West Coast, you don't have them. You go up north,
they don't have them up north.
Yeah, they don't have them up north. They don't have them out on the West Coast. So it's a small population. But if you say Duke, they're gonna know. You know, if you go to a predominantly white institution, they're gonna know. So on one hand, it's like, let's keep it black. On the other hand, it's like, that doesn't work anymore. Like, you have to be able to we had to do that, but we have to get from that survivor mentality to more of a business mentality and start figuring out now, how do we try to grow and expand? That's right. Survival.
So I commonly talk about y'all are too cute. So in therapy, I mean, I can only share this perspective because this is just how I view the world. But when I deal with, like, doesn't matter what race, like, I think I'm honestly kind of my education brainwashed me to constantly look for biases and just try to hold myself accountable to it's not even offending someone, but it's to just make sure I know where and what my intention is. And I commonly say, from a natural human behavior standpoint, if we resist a natural reaction, it becomes a Chinese finger trap. You guys know what that is?
Yeah.
It just happens to be a racial term, but yeah, you get stuck. You pull away quickly, you lock yourself into doing the same thing. So if you overcompensate, like when people say, like, I'm going to do a whole 180, I'm like, no, like, don't try to reverse what you've already done. Stop and see, like, okay, what is either the next best thing, like, what's a conflict, what are your values and what do you need to get out of this situation? What do you want to get out of this situation? And I know that has to be a skill. They don't teach that shit. I mean, we're talking about human experience that we don't teach in schools, let alone the actual skills it takes to manage the human experience these days. Like, our educational system needs a complete revamp.
No, and our needs are changing as a society. Like, just as everything else is changing around us, technology, the way in which just everything. You take COVID, good grief, you know what I'm saying? That escalated so much and created so many pivots. And we're starting to see the brokenness of so many different systems. And that's the thing, really, it's fear, like Brandon was pointing out earlier, like, when it comes to change and such, it's scary, it's different, it's a threat, like Kenita said, to power. And that's what keeps that haltness. Like, you want to hang on to something. Have you ever had somebody who has this terrible habit, right? And you're like, this has to go, this is to your detriment, and you can spell it out. This is why, that's why. If you were in a courtroom, literally, you should get standing ovations. Right. But until that particular person wants to decide to do something different, you can present all of the rationale, the logic in the world, and there's going to be no change to the situation. I think that's the unwillingness, or really the willful ignorance, that I feel like a lot of us are starting to just overflow. And it gets really frustrating for Black people, because it's like, how can you not see what we're talking about? It's so like, I was gonna say, so Black.
I think that's the thing, though, is like, I mean, we're at that point now where it's like, you just don't want to. It's not like, I think we need to I think we need to get past this point of like, you know, I mean, when you're talking about like 4 years ago, you know, whenever we didn't know, like, you know, whether Trump was going to be a racist or not, you know, he had these things in his past in regard to, you know, the Central Park Five and whatnot. But, you know, you want to give a man an opportunity to grow and change and evolve and, you know, see what he does. You know, I was fine with that, you know, cognitive dissonance, you know, regarding, you know, racism and people, you know, having that plausible deniability. Like, I don't, like, you know, we don't know, like, you know, race is so nebulous and racism, you know, how do you know what's racism and what's not? Now it's some black and white shit and you can see it on a regular basis in a variety of places. And I'm not taking the, you know, well, you know, how do you know? I mean, how do you know whether or not, you know, the Confederate flag is a racist? No, it's always been racist.
Right.
What are you talking about? There's no point where it was like rehabilitated.
Oh,
that's a whole nother. That's like a whole nother.
Yeah. So it's like, so
it's a flag of defeat. What?
That's what I'm saying.
Like, you lost.
The Civil War wasn't really about slavery, but no. If we have these documents, these articles of secession, where these racist people put into these articles, we don't want to be part of the United States anymore because we like keeping black people for free labor. That is literally what it says in multiple documents. Like it's a through line. All these different things. Not just one, all of them saying, we want slavery. We heard that y'all about to get rid of it. Fuck y'all. We going to war. That's what it was about.
I'm not gonna hold you though. You know, it would be extremely beneficial. I mean, if there was a way to get some younger people into this as well, because these young folks are some radicals.
They are radical.
We're more like all right, this is how we're gonna structure it. Right. We're gonna structure your radicalism. That's I made it up, but we're gonna structure it in a way, and that's a beautiful thing. But this is the issue: is you have the young people talking about it, then you got like millennials talking about it, and then it's like, well, let's all talk about it together, and that's where I think we need to find a common thing too. And I think that's what made it so powerful when everybody was marching. Yeah, it's because these younger people don't care. Yeah, they don't, and they have social media now. So you know, we didn't have that. It was just like, all right, well, we encountered a race today. I'm gonna tell my friends. Right. But now they have it. They're gonna blast you. They're gonna go. I mean, they're gonna go on your job. They're gonna call your job. They're gonna blast you on your job. They're gonna get you fired.
That's what the girl in the video that we were talking about earlier. That's what she like Sarah said. The meltdown is not over being in trouble. No. Creating a
she knows she's ruined.
She's ruined, right? That's what it really is. She literally is
social shaming.
Yeah, I'm on camera.
That's such a thing. White women in history have been doing those drop of a dime tears since back when Emmett Till got dropped. Right. Like it's like that's a cultural thing. Yeah, it's like it's always been. And Sarah, I meant to piggyback off something you said. It's interesting that you said because your background is like psychology or something, right? Like I know it's
clinical social work.
Social work. So you took a lot of psych classes. It's funny. I took one psych class in grad school, and it's so interesting to see the different perspectives because you said you always look for the bias. The funny thing is, in that one psych class I took, I remember I was reading the book. And in the book, it talked about societal norms, and it listed Native Americans, African Americans, Pacific Islanders. It listed everybody, and never mentioned white folks. So it was the craziest thing. So then the craziest thing to me, and we had to do a discussion. The craziest thing was it talked about how all these other minorities valued their ancestors and familial values. Oh, and for us, it said they believe in a strong foundation of religion, which sometimes makes them lazy because they believe that the Lord is going to, it was saying crazy stuff like this, but it put stock in religion and all this. So on my discussion board, I remember telling my professor, I find it very interesting that all of our principles aligned, and then the basic societal norm, what was supposed to be the normative behavior was just automatically assumed to be white because that's the only one that wasn't listed. So I remember I put that in my discussion, and it's crazy because that's how the textbook is written, and I noticed it, and then I remember she put on my comment section, oh my gosh, come see me. I feel, she literally said to me, sometimes I feel ashamed to be white. I'm sorry you feel like this. It is predominantly white institution. I want you to come talk to me, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it's really not that deep for us. We're just calling it out. But she thought I needed counseling. I'm like, no, I don't need it. I just need you to recognize that the book is biased, that what you're teaching is biased, and I'm not going to go for it. And it's as simple as that. So even in our the things that we're provided, like our books and our, like he was saying, our curriculum and things, it's biased. It's ridiculous.
After, in case in point, that connects directly with what you're saying, is after the Civil War, these daughters of the Confederacy some years later started going around and, like I said before, integrating into school boards and communities, like petitioning school boards and communities with books that were Confederate approved, that made the Civil War look like the war of Northern aggression, and talking about all of these false representations of the Confederacy that they wanted integrated into the learning curriculum. That's what these women wanted to have happen. And they were successful in a lot of the Southern states because, once again, the Southern states didn't want to look like the losers. They didn't want their way of life to be threatened. They wanted their children to look at their past as one of glory, as one of persecution. Mm-hmm. And now we have today individuals who are grown walking around saying the Civil War wasn't about slavery.
Yep. Everything you're saying is still relevant today too, because that's the same fight going on now. Mm-hmm. If you look now, like you've heard it, they're trying to revamp a lot of the education, and you have I saw one day it was a young white female that went in there and said you shouldn't change what we're learning. So even some kids, I mean, that's just learned behavior from a parent. Yeah, but the thing is, like they're getting pissed about it. They're like, we're not changing anything because that's going to show. Oh my gosh, we all know we're racist, but don't tell us. Right. Like don't make it like loud. Don't say it out loud. But we're literally like, it's history. We're revisiting all of that, and that same thing you said is what's going back around now. We're fighting now to even try to revamp the curriculum, and they're not having it.
What? I have a question, Sarah. This question is for you. I'm going to kind of put you in the hot seat and on the spot right now as a warning. If there is anything, and we all know that no one can speak for an entire group, right? That was kind of one of the things that we were negating earlier. But if there is something that you have heard or gathered from conversations with white friends, white family, just anybody in the past, if there was one message that you could kind of package and box, from the white perspective that you wish Black people knew.
Yes.
Because it's almost like we don't ever get an inside peek into these conversations. I almost feel like it's easier for you as a white person to have a seat in a conversation with Black people in regards to race, much easier than it is for us to have a seat at a table with white people in regards to race. So with that, can you kind of unpackage that or package that? Yeah. And say, what is it that you want us to know or understand, and not in a way that supports, if it doesn't naturally support any part of what we're saying or whatever, if it goes against the grain and rubs our hair the wrong way, I still want to know it.
Yeah, for sure.
This is,
I have no problem telling you the truth.
Yeah, like what's up? Like,
but yeah. Speak, sister.
Well, the first problem is that you're asking me to give a condensed answer. That's also just personal to me, but then also as a therapist, we have an inside joke in our profession is that our answer is always going to be, it depends, because there really is there's an infinite number of problems that we're going to experience in this life, which means there's going to be an infinite amount of answers. Some will be right or wrong based off morals and values. But those are also still like written by one thing. I say that to say, I don't know if there's just one thing. From a white person's perspective, that I would want a Black person or any person of color, Asian person, Hispanic, to understand. But I would attribute it to the humanistic perspective, not just the white. And that's kind of, it's hard, and I may come up with a better answer. We may have to talk about it again later, but what I know, and I'll reference something that was brought up at the beginning of this, is that studies have shown that when we experience trauma, our account of the actual events is not 100% accurate. Every person in this who's breathing has experienced some type of trauma in their life, and to different degrees, some more than others as well. So there is sometimes an inability to be at the same place that someone else is to have these conversations. I see that in a lot of white people, because there's been a lot of wrongdoing that has been passed down, just like there's been a lot of trauma passed down in the African American community that has posed epigenetics, as it was brought up earlier, that has changed the way that families grow, and then also teach their children about what is and how to go about navigating societal standards. And I also see that, but that trauma response in everyone, not just for white people. But I do think that white people we're going to resist being told that we're wrong, because it completely invalidates our experience. Just like any other human would react to being like, well, I'm not wrong, you can't tell me I'm right. You're absolutely right. And we throw these perspectives back and forth with each other as weapons, and we don't stop to realize that they are both true, but there is probably less of an impact or a negative consequence for believing one of them, because it includes being kind, loving one another, and you don't need to be part of a religious structure to follow those principles. We don't need to kill each other.
That's the insidious. I mean, but that's the insidious nature of white supremacy, is that like it gives the perception of the opposite, that you know we do have to kill each other. Like that has to happen every so often, because whiteness is constantly under attack and you're constantly going to be outnumbered. So if you buy into this mythology of white supremacy, you're also buying into the reality that there are going to be some brown people that are going to go to jail. There's going to be some brown people you're going to have to kill. There's going to be some brown people, that may have to be murdered on TV from time to time. There's going to be some brown people that are going to be poor. Like, you're going to have to embrace that fact. You're going to have to embrace that reality. And we have this whole separate set of laws, history for you to take, that's supposed to accompany the treatment that you're expected to give out to individuals. And by making it uncomfortable for you to see the reality, you're going to eat the junk food that we're offering you.
Yeah.
Versus
the
professionals who are fixing things.
For sure. That's such a great point. Media is definitely going to push the narrative.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying it's all media. I mean, a lot of stuff happens, but at the end of the day, like, media is gonna sway you whatever way they want you to go as well. And just to kind of piggyback what Sarah was saying too, like, or what Keela was saying, I found, for me personally, I'm only speaking from my perspective, the biggest change I've seen in white friends I have has always been building that rapport and them getting to know me, and because it's almost like that same concept as if you have a favorite show and you get invested in the character and then the character dies, so you cry. So it's like it immediately impacts you and affects you because you have grown with this character. You're like, oh shoot, I actually feel an impact. I feel a type of way. So I think that has been one of the biggest things for me too. So it's like, we have to be open to having conversations, not just amongst like-minded people, but we have to expand and be able to have conversations where we know we're going to get pissed off, but be able to still have those conversations. Because as you keep having those conversations, you get in rooms with those people and they start seeing you as just this person. They actually start seeing you as a human and like falling in love with that character. Then you're able to kind of change the narrative a little bit. And I think that's important too, but we come from such a place of there's so much hurt in history. It's hard for a lot of people to do. So it is, I mean, I came from a different type of background. So did Keela, where it's like, we grew up where, you know, we embraced a lot of different people from all backgrounds, so it's a little easier for us to have those conversations. But if we came from a place like my parents or my father who was in, or her father who was integrated into, you know, the school system, some of the first blacks to go, white teachers telling them they're stupid and holding them back, that's a whole different mindset. They're not going to have the same mindset or tolerance for these conversations we are, because times have changed for them. So they're thinking, if I smack you, I'm not a little kid that y'all going, the Klan's going to roll up in my house, I'm gonna piece you up. Where we didn't grow up like that. We're like, well, no, let's have an open conversation. So that's the other piece of it too. There's way too much hurt for certain generations to ever come to the table, and that's just being real. Yeah, it is sad, but it's being real, and I don't blame them, because I can't. If somebody shot one of my loved ones, I'm not gonna love them. You know what I mean? So I get it.
It makes it difficult.
I get it, but I think that's where we have to really be mindful as the next generation, like the younger ones are doing too, and really start getting in these rooms where it's like, we're both going to be uncomfortable, but let's start having some real conversations, not tiptoe.
And that, I mean, that discomfort is going to be there. But to touch on what you were saying earlier, Sarah, about like, you know, the ambivalence that's expressed by, you know, some white people, because, you know, they feel like it doesn't affect them. They need to understand that it does. Like, you know, white supremacy actually hurts white people. Like, just because it has white at the front does not mean that you're going to be okay. It's child abuse in that, you have to lie to children. You're misrepresenting reality to them. So they're going out into the world and they may say something that ends up, you know, with them getting into a fight or getting shot or whatever. Like,
well, I was gonna say, just look at how our definition of white supremacy. If you're not racist, but you're not having the conversations, that generalization is hurting your feelings a little bit, right?
Exactly.
Right. So whether you stand up for understanding it or not, I mean, just hearing this conversation, that's why it's recorded, just as a heads up. So it's not like fully broadcast everywhere, but is so people, because my story is that I grew up in a place where I didn't have access to these perspectives. And I see friends that live there, and it's not that they're racist, but it's that the exposure to that, whether it's culture, whether it's just looking different, and it is automatically paid attention to, but then also like, oh, well, it's different. I don't need to understand that. They're not going to have the same, well, no one's going to have the same experience as I do, but they're at least just, I mean, that's where it's like, I try not to put it just on white people to have this talk, because it takes perspective from both sides, but is that there are also Black people who have not just been exposed to what white people are like. Not all white people are racist. There's generalizations that come from every direction. And I lost my train of thought.
I mean, I'm with you.
Diplomatic conversations too, because that's the other thing. Like, so Sarah, I asked you that question earlier that way on purpose, and you know, it's all love from me, but you gave me a very diplomatic answer,
for sure,
which is what you're trained to do and what's more comfortable to do. But that's not really what I wanted, because even though I know I can't speak for the masses of Black people, I will group together and tell you a message that kind of sums up a lot of perspective of what I heard. So I can give you a message from the Black folks, and here it is. What we all really, really, really want more than anything is acknowledgement. And accountability.
We want to be able to say, y'all invited to the cookout.
Exactly, like genuinely, like I just really want for them to say, you know what, there is a problem. You know, I don't know how to solve it. I don't know what part you even would want me to play. I don't know where to begin, but I do recognize that there's an issue. And simply because when, say if Kenita is white and I'm Black or whatever, and we both have whatever, and we both have children, and they go to school together and they're playing, how can you say that this white child or this Black child is any less human or any different in their human experience or expression than the next child? And that's the thing, it takes sometimes children to bring it all the way down. There was a video that was viral, it was probably years old, but it was two little kids. No, maybe it was recent because it was COVID. They didn't get to go to daycare together for a while, and they saw each other for the first time. They hugged each other. Kids don't have those same hangups as we do, but how can you explain to a child that this kid is going to be treated differently because of that. And I feel like if we look at it from that standpoint, not all of us are parents, but I think a parent can sit and say, you know what, as I look at the innocence of children and I look at your child and my child, there is no difference between them. Different amounts of melanin, different texture of hair. That's about all I got. That's all I can come up with. And it's kind of like if we take it down to that super, super simple level, how could someone not understand? And that really is all we're asking for, acknowledgement and just to say, I see that there's an issue.
You know, it's crazy, just to piggyback off of that too, is it's going to take them getting outside of being comfortable. And just like we were integrated into the schools, integrate your mindset. So how many realistically, if a black person, Asian person, whatever has a mentor, they're usually the same race, but we don't have the same knowledge. So how many white mentors do we have? Like, and I know that, hey, that might be contradictory, because at the same time, like, I ain't trying to learn that from a white person. But if you don't network, you got network to increase your network. We can't get in the same rooms that they can. So how many people from races that are high, like white cisgender males, whatever, or white women are reaching back and saying, oh shoot, I'm gonna mentor this young black girl, this young black boy.
That's not a thing.
That's not a thing. That's what I'm saying. It's like that mindset isn't there. But I mean, that's the kind of stuff it's going to take, because then when you start, a lot of people get things from mentorships and internships and getting into rooms and things like that. But if you don't even have the knowledge, a lot of us don't even have the type of knowledge that a lot of whites grow up with.
That is
we don't have that knowledge. We don't know about some of the investing they do. There's a lot of people that go to school just to go to school. They come out and they know they're going to be good no matter what, because their parents have a certain type of knowledge, or they came from nothing and they're doing amazing now because you know what, they're white and American. That's just how it works. So it's like we have to start changing that narrative too, of like, all right, well, let's kind of like uplift each other, and instead of just, oh, I'm gonna go with what's familiar, we have to pull each other up across the board. But that's just not the mindset.
Well, because it creates discomfort. No
Absolutely.
one wants to go.
And I was gonna interject there real quick too, is because as growth, like you are not going to, your bones will grow back twice as stronger as soon as you break them. Now, it's not an excuse to go break your bones but it has to be uncomfortable for it to be able to get stronger. And damn, I really did have another thought there.
It's like, maybe you start writing it down. I did it all.
I've been writing it down. That's the problem.
I'll be like, oh, squirrel. And I'm like, what was I saying?
I'm like, maybe I can finish it for you. I think you were trying to say,
Try it.
As we, well, I'm going to try to finish it. As we, go through these uncomfortable situations, and we flex that muscle, or we break those bones, we make mistakes and whatnot, those are potential learning opportunities for us to get stronger. No,
I'm not stopping you. I'm still sitting here. I'm like, what the hell was I thinking about?
That's where I felt that you were going with it.
It probably was.
Going with it.
It's my go-to way to close up things, because I mean, it ends with learning. We have to be we've learned to walk by watching people, and with making those mistakes. You can't deny that social learning starts from day one, regardless of what side you sit on with this. And you have the ability to learn. I don't care. Learning. I spent money to get my education. I probably should have done it differently now that I know what I did.
Right.
And that's just, the mistake I was willing to make. And now from here, I just continue to educate myself on, I did it in this forum because, I actually am not. I get worn out with people. And I was the person that got worn out with this conversation, which once I realized that I couldn't just go do something, I had to be consistent. And so I just put myself in a position where I had to commit to being uncomfortable.
I love that. It is. Yeah. One of my friends, we went to college together. 6'5" white girl from a little town. Yeah, a little town in Pennsylvania, who grew up maybe 2 black people in town. So she didn't grow up around really being diverse. So I was actually with her in Denver this past weekend, and I'm a bridesmaid in her wedding, so we came a long way. But that was the first time that I've ever been in a situation where I've been the only black person, and it was a very interesting situation because all her bridesmaids besides me are all white. So I was very intrigued to see how that process was going to go, and never thought about it. It was amazing. It was a great time. However, from where me and Rachel came from originally, I'll never forget, we've had some uncomfortable conversations. Like, 2 things I'll say. when we first met, when we were freshmen in college playing ball, her grandmother was coming. And she said, hey, I want to let you know now, and this just kind of gives you how people perceive things. My grandmother still says colored. And she was just kind of, I was like, oh, that's interesting, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a young Black female from Florida. She's like, I'm out, I'm just going to leave the room. The other one's like, she say something to me, but, we're going to have problems. Like, all right, she's an elder. I get it. Then there's the Kanita approach, right? So her grandma walks in, and I walk up and I yell, grandma, grab her, pick her up, give her a big old hug. She's like, oh my goodness. And I'm like, grandma, twisting her around. A couple years passed. So like, she's like, oh, what the heck? I ended up making a Christmas list. She doesn't even buy Christmas gifts for her grandkids. She started calling me her grandbaby. I changed the narrative. And then fast forward, when all this stuff, it wasn't last year, it was like the year before, something that happened. And I forget who it was. It might have been Trayvon. Someone got killed. And my homegirl, same person, was like, she was posting about athletic training or something like that. And I literally made a caption on Facebook and put her in the most uncomfortable. No, I made a caption. She said something and I responded back to her in our messaging. And I said, when are you actually going to use your voice and say something? I called her out on Facebook. Called her out on Facebook. And I was like, that was a test of our friendship. It could have went left. But that was the most uncomfortable position I've ever put her in. Yeah. But I'm like, listen, you gotta make a decision. I'm calling you out in front of everybody. Yeah. And next thing you know, she went on Facebook and made a caption and said, you know what, my sis made a good point. I didn't even realize that I was being complicit, because whatever she said, she tagged me in the post, made the post, and ever since then, she's been like one of the best allies I could have. Like, I mean, even making t-shirts and trying to sell it to nonprofits, just spreading awareness, just even her own element of being that no Black people in her town, talking to people in that area. And it's been amazing.
You should invite her to this for sure.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna invite her. Sure. But it's like she changed her whole mindset, because it wasn't that she was just like, oh, whatever. It was just kind of like the it's like that implicit thing of, well, not my people, not my problem, without even realizing it. But then she got called out, it changed.
That's what's good. I mean, that's what has to happen.
Exactly.
Sarah, you were talking earlier, about like, I mean, just acknowledging the discomfort and whatnot. That's one step. But I think that's something that we can all collectively say, is reality. That it's not debatable anymore. It's like Will Smith said, it's like, it's been going on for a while. The only difference now is it's being filmed. So now that we know, it's irrefutable proof, irrefutable evidence in regard to education, in regard to the medical community, in regard to our judicial system, in regard to our political system, that there is an issue in regard to systemic racism. Now that we know about this, people have to take a side. And I think that's one of the major issues that we're facing right now, is people don't want to take the side. I don't know what's going on with the Black people. Why are the Black people so upset? I don't watch any news. I don't know really what's going on. I don't know, what they're talking about. Who died? What happened? And so you have this don't see it, don't know what's going on, head burying in the sand by some individuals. And then you have some people who are doubling down, like, this is the way it's always been, can't fix it. There's no other system.
I actually remembered what I was going to say as soon as it wasn't about education, actually.
Go, Sarah.
Yes, the brain's still there. Yes. So it's actually when Keela put me on the spot, and you're right, it was a diplomatic answer. I will say that's only what I know how to do at this point, like you said, but and I'll still reflect on that. But I actually would challenge your point, is that all you want is acknowledgement that it's happening. And I would say that it's yes, that's the first step, but for those people who acknowledge it, it has to be action. There does need to be a continuous challenge to the limit of comfort. It doesn't have to be a big one. The thing about discomfort is that we get used to it. We're adaptive creatures, whether you believe, in those scientific theories behind that, but is that our perception of pain and discomfort is 90% emotional reaction. So if you're physically uncomfortable, well, you're going to get used to it. And then we need to learn some skills. So if it's not action in like having the conversation about race yet, then it's learning how to manage the discomfort that you get and that you can't cope with. that's an action that's in line with the bigger picture. So take some action.
But you got to own that discomfort first, because the way people are programmed now is if I talk to you about race and then you feel uncomfortable, suddenly Brandon's the problem because I brought this to your attention. And that's
what we call projection.
Exactly. And that's what a good number of individuals in this country have been programmed to do. That's what you're looking at when you're looking at right-wing politics. Let me teach you how to project your discomfort onto those individuals who are telling you that supporting us is racist. And so you have a number of individuals who are embracing that because, like I said before, race is a construct that we internalize from birth. And you either choose to steer into it or you recognize it for what it is. And you're like, okay, I'm going to separate myself and look at this objectively. And that requires energy, time, knowledge that a lot of people don't have for a variety of reasons in society, which is also another component of white supremacy. But that's a whole other conversation.
Well, just say you can barely scratch the surface of. I feel like we did a decent job with, like, we talked a little bit about what critical race theory is, and then it's more about the application of just why we don't know about it and what we also see and why the importance is, like we see on the media portrayal, like with the video that we started with, and then that we were going to talk about another portrayal with the UNC system right now, which we can also pick up on another time, because this conversation, sorry, if you call me your friend, you're gonna be invited a lot longer than you expected.
There's something else I want to say in response to what you said earlier, Sarah. Even though, like, it's like, what did you say? That it should be an action behind it, right? And we should want that. Have you ever been in a situation where you've set normal, natural expectations, and at so many different points in time, disappointment, that at a certain point you lower your expectations? It is sad that simple acknowledgement would get us so far before we get to the necessary action. We know it needs to come, but we would be so satisfied in some ways to at least get to the first step of, can we all just at once say that we have a problem? That's sad that we would be willing to accept that. But that's how far down we are. And I want to venture to say there's 3 other people that are on. We're very, like, outspoken and whatnot. But I know you want to wrap up, Sarah, but I want to ask if we could call anybody else to the table to see if there's any other perspectives for us to chew on.
Real quick too, just real quick. I'm gonna let y'all do your thing. What she was saying too, like what I was thinking when you said that, just acknowledgement. We've never asked for more than literally civil rights.
Right.
It was like we didn't ask for, like, we want to be president. We didn't. We literally asked for rights that a human being should be given.
Right.
We literally fought for civil rights, so it's no different. We've only ever fought for, like, at least the minimum.
Basic
like this
rights.
Is the minimum we want. So and respectfully, I hear what you're saying. There should be action, but if somebody that's actually going through it is like, well, you can't really dictate what I'm asking for. It's like you can assume that there should be action, but at the same time, it's like, well, that's just what we want right now. That's step 1, because we don't even have that, so we can't even be asking for more. It's like, I know somebody that's woke is gonna be like, oh yeah, y'all need more. It's like, we do, but we can't even get the basics. We fought just to get the civil part. We still fighting to get that. So it's just like, we just want acknowledgement at this point, and then from there maybe we can keep going. And what's up, Jake and
so
you're on mute.
Hey, I'm here.
Jake had put his 2 cents in at the end, but I will say, for anyone Jake knows this too, but who's new to it, is like, you gotta get in where you can. But I also will acknowledge that I've gotten away from the original Zoom rules, was like, raise your hand and try not to talk over people. I think I just got grown accustomed, but so just for future reference.
No, it was flowing perfectly. I didn't want to interrupt. I was driving, so I definitely like the flow of the content this week. It was fantastic. But to everyone's point, acknowledgement's cool, but kind of like what Keela had said earlier, if everyone had a sense of self. I'm kind of not really seeking that anymore. For me, especially as a parent, it's kind of just about informing the next generation and making sure they're informed. I mean, in speaking about critical race theory, it's not just, I think the media, I had sent Sarah a text, it's the media makes it a black-white thing. There's critical race theorists that are speaking from the Native American perspective, from the Chicano perspective, the importance of what the Chinese Americans have done since they've been in America in the 1800s and going forward. And that's all being kind of whitewashed. And like you said, the textbooks are biased. They're written from a perspective as if white is right and everything else is just kind of here. And it's nonsense. As a collective, we've kind of built this country, and it's being diminished. But the fact that now people are not trying to take away from anyone else, but just trying also to shine a light on the importance of our contributions, that's problematic for some. And they're making it seem as if we're trying to erode what they are, which is basically what has been done this whole time for our perspectives. And it's just funny how it can be manipulated to something that should be happening is now made to be something negative. So
Agreed.
Yeah, we're gonna have definitely a part 2, part 3 if we need it. I mean, I feel like if critical race theory in general is just, you know, one different perspective of how to look at your relationship with race. But Ty, since we are taking the opportunity, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but did you have anything you wanted to add, or Miss Karen?
Oh, we cannot hear you.
Can't hear
She's
me.
unmuted. She may just be listening and not realize. So we'll.
She took a mute. I can hear her talking. Hold on.
No, I am unmuted.
Oh, there you go.
Here we go.
I was unmuted before. It was just slow unmuting apparently, but anyway, yeah, I've been listening to you all, and I think I know we all have our own implicit biases. I know I do. I mean, we all do. I was a child in the 60s. Yeah, that picture looks good, right? Y'all didn't think I was that old, but yeah, but I was a child in the 60s, and I remember things. I lived it. I lived a father who served in the military coming back home being disrespected. I remember my dad getting stopped, and my mom was in the car. We were traveling, and it was night, and him giving my mom his gun, saying, the policeman came to the car and got him out. And he said, if I don't come back, if I don't come back, just start shooting. And I remember being a kid and my mother saying, be quiet, just sit there, be quiet. Because we were coming through Tennessee at the time. And I remember just being scared. I remember being just really afraid because I didn't know what was going to happen. Because I didn't know if they were going to take my dad and beat him up, hang him, whatever. We just didn't know. And being a child during that time, you just remember the anger, the fear, the hurt growing up. Now, granted, my experiences are very different because my dad was a military man. So as a child, I also lived in other places. So I got to see some other things. And so even with that, I mean, at the age of like 8, 9 years old, we were living in Germany when integration wasn't happening any place in the country. I was integrated. I was on a base military school. And so I went to school with white people and Oriental people. And so it gave me a different perspective. I had a paradigm shift on race because I thought, when you're in a country when no one speaks the language, then it doesn't matter what color you are. You speak the language, hey, you're good people. Right? I mean, because we can communicate. Then I come back to the United States. And all of a sudden I'm thrown into a situation where integration took place and I'm being called the N-word. I'm like, what the heck? I mean, so when I look at this thing, I have a whole lot of emotions about this, and let me tell you, at my present age, if I think about them too long, some of them are very fresh even now
Mhm.
because the hurt was so real and so deep. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because this race situation is going to take more than um, acknowledgement. It's going to take more than um, talk. We have to have action. People have to be involved. There's got to be a change of heart. And I really don't know what that's going to take, particularly when you have the so many people not even acknowledging that white privilege is real.
Mhm.
They won't even acknowledge it, even today. I mean, currently, I mean, I'm still working in corporate America. I see so much stuff, guys, that I'm not even going to go into it. I've been sitting here listening to you. I admire this. I've been sitting here quietly, smiling, laughing. You guys are great. And I don't know what the answer is here. I wish I had an answer. But all I know is we got to keep fighting. We've got to keep going until we get to the answer because what's happening now cannot continue, not for the next generation and the next generation, and for your children, for the people on this call. I don't know how old you are, Jake and Tashbend. I messed your name up,
Pretty go.
but that's okay. You know, um, I mean, forgive me if I did. I mean, I didn't mean to make light of it, but my thing is that I don't know how old you all are, but whatever's happening here for your children, for your lives and your children, it can't be just talk. It's got to be action, and it's got to be something long lasting. And I'm great to be a part of this. It's been wonderful.
Yes.
I'm
Glad to
trying
have
to
you here.
I'm trying to give it some thought myself. You know, I have been trying, particularly since last year, seeing just the blatant. I mean, we've known it's always been there in the African American community, the the disrespect from the judicial system, the killing of African Americans. But this last year, year and a half has been off the chain.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I mean, it really has. Now the world sees what we've always known. And see, the thing is now, with all this emotion, and again, I'm older than you guys, and I still got that emotion in me. Can you imagine what other people my age and older are feeling?
Mhm.
Who
Hmm.
have suffered probably more than I've suffered or had to have, live with? How do you deal with that hurt? See, after that hurt comes the anger. And
Mhm.
that's the part that is really difficult. It is very difficult. I mean, even now, as I said, if I think about some of these things too hard or too long, the emotion of it all will flood back into my spirit and I have to just whew, exhale to let it go. After
Mhm.
living with that all this time, you know, where do you put that? And I don't have an answer. I don't. You make change where you can and you hope for the best. But at any rate,
No, I really appreciate you sharing that. And this is gonna be I'm gonna have the last word here. Yes, the white
yeah,
woman
I'm
will
not
do
going
it.
to take the floor,
But
but
but I want because it was brought up twice. It was something that I had thought about. I'm reading a book called by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning,
Good
and
book.
it's a very significant book in my field. I recommend it for anyone, but it talks about it's a Holocaust perspective, and he was a no, he was a psychiatrist that went through it didn't matter how much education he had. He was still Jewish and he was put in a concentration camp, and he took that study or that experience as a study about, how do we get through life. I'm not going to spoil the book for you, but I can't answer the question because I don't have an answer, which is why I'm here, to talk about the fact that I don't have an answer, um, about in terms of like the oppression of people based off their race and a social construct. But I do have an answer, um, that is, it still is a depend situation, but healing is what has to be done. And there are certain professions that help you with that. And the healthcare system, I think, is also changing to do that. But I don't want to say therapy is the answer. It's not the only answer. But if anything, doing your own healing and learning how to the other schools of thought to be able to take your experience of suffering and be able to turn it into an empowerment and a true actual like generator of energy for yourself. I know is possible. I've seen it. I'd like to say I have helped people get there. But I've also lived it in my own experience, using my own perspective of suffering to be the outcome. So regardless of what it was, and there may be a lot more suffering that one person has done, but that also means there's a lot more healing that can be the product of that. So hopefully that will be only 15 minutes over. I feel like it's a nice round number of that, but I really appreciate y'all and your input tonight. And yeah, I'm just grateful for you guys to be here for the people who do want to listen and who can listen right now. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See y'all next time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Bye.
Take care.